What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. So today is Wednesday, May 28th, and we are continuing on with our 355 days of vlogging. And today we are continuing our conversation around habits. So yesterday we talked a little bit about how to know if a habit is a good habit to keep, and today we are talking about habits and your children. So that brings us to today's verse. Today's scripture reading comes from Proverbs 22:6, reads, "Train a child up in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." So that brings us to the topic for today, which is how do you help your child or your children develop good habits? We're going to go over 10 tips to help your child develop positive habits. So let's go. That brings us to tip number one. Tip number one is to be the example. I know we've all heard that saying, do as I say, not as I do, but that doesn't really work with children. They're still learning and growing and developing, and in their adolescence, even often as adults, we tend to learn by observing. So if you want your children to be nice to other people, you want to practice being nice to other people. If you find your child has gotten caught up in gossiping, pay attention to the areas in your life where you might be talking about other people in a negative way when they're not around. If you would like your child to spend more time cleaning their room, you want to make sure that your room is clean, or that you're tidying the living room in front of them. Just them observing you doing something makes it more likely that they will engage in that same activity. So this is not only true for negative habits like smoking or drinking, cursing, but also true for positive habits. If they see that you can have compassion and empathy for people, if they see that you know how to be patient with other people and with yourself, chances are it will become easier for them to model that same behavior because they've seen it before. Because they've seen it before on a regular basis from you. Next, we have tip number two. Tip number two is to start small but be consistent. So just like we talked about children learning through observation, through observing positive behavior and emulating it, or observing negative behavior and then copying that behavior, if we're not consistent in our modeling or reminding the child when they're starting to implement this new habit, if we're not being consistent in reminding and our modeling, then it also teaches the child to be inconsistent with implementing that new habit. And then we also want to make sure that while we're being consistent, that we are starting small. If we have a whole new set of rules that we want to implement in our home and change habits for the better for our family, we want to make sure that we're not doing everything all at once, especially when we're looking at working with young children or adolescents, because it can be overwhelming. And the last thing we want to do is put additional stress or strain on the child or on the parent-child relationship because we're being unreasonable with our requests, because we're asking them to maybe like build a house, if you will, and they've never done anything like that before. It's something that doesn't happen overnight. It's something that requires multiple steps to achieve. So if you have a child, for example, who is used to getting D's, and you're saying, okay, well, this next semester you're going to get all A's, and that's something that they haven't done before, they haven't done in years, that might be a little bit hard to achieve. But set milestones for the goals and you start small with habits, then we can continually build on those habits until we can achieve that larger goal of having this new routine accomplished, or for creating a new routine in your child's life. So we want to make sure that we're starting small with manageable habits. If you're trying to get your child to brush and floss every day and they're not brushing their teeth at all, you might have to set an alarm clock for them in the evening and say, okay, it's time to brush your teeth, okay, it's time to floss your teeth, instead of saying, do this new habit that you've never done before without any reminders and without any help. Sometimes it's easier to fall back into old patterns of eating sugar before bed and forgetting to brush and floss our teeth. So sometimes as parents, we can help our children by reminding them to do the thing, or encouraging them to set reminders for themselves so they can hold themselves accountable. But to try to steer away from setting unrealistic goals and then punishing our children for not meeting them. So that's tip number 2. Start small and be consistent. That brings us to tip number 3. Tip number 3 is to make it a routine. So we talked a couple of days ago about habit stacking and how you can take one activity that happens regularly without fail and then adding that new activity, that new habit that you're trying to implement on top of it. This is where we're working with younger children. Sometimes it might be beneficial to add a visual aid such as a chore chart, but to make sure when we're trying to implement a new habit into a routine, that we recognize the purpose of the routine is to add structure and make sure that it's easier to accomplish a task, or to make sure that the habits are done on a regular and consistent basis. So when we're looking at setting up the routine, we want to make sure that it's convenient. That's why we were talking about habit stacking. So if you're saying, okay, I want to make sure that my child does their homework every day, and instead of looking at your child's routines, the habits that they already have set in place, you just pick a random time that you think will be a good time for them to do their homework, not taking into account your child's sleep schedule, what time they get up in the morning, if they're a morning person or an evening person. Maybe they're more productive in the early hours of the morning or in the afternoon. Maybe it's best for them to try to do their homework during their lunch break or before they go to school. But this is something that I've had to learn with working with my daughter and working with other people and their children. Sometimes when we try to set up new routines for our children without involving them, we end up creating more resistance, not just for the child, but for ourselves, because then everyone's frustrated. For example, when we were talking about starting a routine for making sure your child is doing their homework every day, starting homework right after they get home from school might sound like a great idea. But after speaking with several parents and their children, often the child is tired from being at school all day. They get home and they want a break. They want to have a rest for a minute before they do their homework. And to allow your child some space for that, some flexibility within the routines. So it'll be easier to set up the new habits if they're not exhausted because there's no room to take a break. Sometimes that looks like a good job or a high five. Maybe that's dinner at their favorite restaurant. Maybe that's taking them out to a movie. Maybe that's a family game night. But to make sure that you're acknowledging what they do well and then highlighting that above everything else. If you can take 5 minutes to reprimand your child, you can take 15 minutes to lift them up. So the positive reinforcement should always outweigh any kind of reprimanding that we need to do, any kind of course correction that we need to do. Because when we think about our relationship with God too, when God needs to reprimand or course correct with us, God is not browbeating us. He's not condemning us and trying to make sure that we feel so much shame around our behavior that we are shamed into obedience. But there is conviction and there's love. There's conviction, there is love, and there is grace. We want to make sure that we're showing that same love and grace with our children. That brings us to tip number 6, is to make it fun. Who says being responsible can't be fun? And we want to make sure that our children have something to look forward to, the rewards of being disciplined, the rewards of being responsible. We want to show that to our children in a tangible way. If you make sure that your room is clean every day this week, then we can go to the park this weekend, or we can go out for smoothies together or a bike ride. And then at the same time, sometimes we want to make sure that we're doing something fun with our kiddos just because we love them. At the same time, if we're working on our chores, if we're working on implementing a new habit, it doesn't mean that we have to be serious about it. It doesn't mean that there can't be laughter. Maybe we can incorporate music, just something to remind them of what the goal is, why we are working on implementing this new habit, what that means, how it can be beneficial. We are making sure that our room is tidy and clean so that we can have a more restful sleep. And if you have a restful sleep, then you can get up in the morning in time for pancakes for breakfast or something fun like that. That just because we are engaging in activities and engaging in healthy habits that are good for our physical and mental health can be enjoyable. So that's tip number 6. Tip number 7 is to teach self-awareness. So after we've implemented this new habit and we've added the reward onto it, or we've explained to our child the benefit of implementing this new habit, once it's done, we can ask them how they feel, right? How did it feel to not have mommy yelling at you to get up in the morning for school and get ready for school, to already be ready to go and have enough energy to get up because we went to bed on time the night before? Or how does it feel to go to sleep in your room when it's tidy and to wake up to a clean room? And how does it feel to get up on time so that we can have smoothies in the morning on the way to school? So then it teaches them not only is there a reward associated with implementing these new healthy habits, but I also feel good about myself, right? Or if we're working on an exercise routine with the kiddos, how they feel after moving their body in the morning, if they feel like they have more energy at the end of the day. So that's tip number 7, self-awareness. Tip number 8 is to talk about mistakes calmly, right? Because we all make them. You can expect that your child is going to make mistakes, that they're going to get upset, and we want to make sure that we're not matching their behavior or mirroring their behavior, but even when our kiddo is upset, that we're modeling the behavior that we want them to exhibit. Because sometimes, even when our child is showing up in a way that we don't appreciate, and you're thinking, what's with this attitude? You know, I didn't teach you that, your dad didn't teach you that, but it's something they learned from somewhere else. So instead of just interpreting that behavior or that habit of them snapping at you as, oh, they've lost control again, as their subconscious asking you to show them how to respond to that behavior. So if we're having a moment where I'm picking on my little brother and mom's upset, why am I doing this? Am I being picked on at school? So your response to that behavior shows your child how to respond to that same behavior. And so this might not just have to do with outbursts when we're talking about making mistakes. Maybe it's a mistake on schoolwork, or maybe it's a mistake when you gave them a task to do and they didn't perform the way that you wanted them to, or maybe they just made a bad choice. It wasn't the best choice. Even then, we lead with love, right? So your response to that behavior teaches them how to treat themselves when they're older and they're making mistakes. So if you find yourself being hypercritical of your child when they make a mistake, it's probably because you're hypercritical of yourself when you make a mistake. So to remember, when we're leading by example, to show ourselves grace as well. And a good way to practice that is to talk about your mistakes calmly with your child. So, man, and I try to remember this often. So if I'm at work and I had a rough work day, I might pick up my daughter from school and say, man, Stace, Mom had a long day today at work, and she'll say, what happened? And then I'll tell her, oh, I messed up on this report, but I'm just gonna have to. And sometimes she'll jump in and she'll say, it's okay, you'll do better next time. Or she'll encourage me that it's not a big deal. And when I'm speaking with her, it's in a calm way that reassures her that even though I make a mistake, even when she makes a mistake, it's okay, right? Mistakes are meant to teach us something. We are meant to learn from mistakes, to learn, to grow, and move forward. So that brings us to tip number 9. Tip number 9 is to include your child in the decision making. So we talked about that a little bit before. If you want to make sure that your child is doing their homework, they seem disinterested, you can ask them, why are you feeling unmotivated to do your homework? And then listen. It might be, well, this problem is really hard for me, or I am tired right when I get home from school. And then you can offer them suggestions like, well, what if you did your homework in the afternoon? Or you can ask them, what do you feel might help you get a better handle on your homework? Or if they would like for you to help them, or if tutoring is an option. I know some kiddos feel uncomfortable around the idea of having a tutor, but if that's going to save them time in the long run, you want to make sure whatever stigma they might have around asking for help is removed. So that might take a little bit of research in order to achieve, but if they see you modeling again, if they see you asking for help, then it becomes easier for them to know it's okay to ask for help. Or finding something that your child is good at and then having them help their sibling or another child with that same task. If you can find an opportunity where your child can help someone else, sometimes that can motivate them or encourage them that it's okay to ask for help themselves. So that's tip number 9, including your child in the development of the new habits you are trying to implement. Or asking them, what habits do you think would be beneficial to helping you complete your homework on time, or helping you to study for your homework, or helping you to get ready for school on time. Tip number 10 is to remember to be flexible. Good habits build on each other. So just as we were talking about habit stacking, to also remember that children grow and develop over time, so do their needs and their habits. So if we're looking at implementing habits for our 3-year-old, that might look a little bit different from the habits that we want to implement for our 15-year-old. And while a lot of parenting has to do with that stage of development over their chronological age, we still want to take into account some of the things that might be typical for an adolescent that is within our child's age range, and to do some research on that as well, so that we're not overlooking something that needs to be addressed based on our child's age. And it's easy to do that if we're making sure to take the time to put in the work. If you have a good life coach that you're working with who specializes in working with children, if you have a good mentor or parent or pastor that you can bounce ideas off of, someone who has more experience working with and raising young children, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, waste time, and give yourself and your child an additional headache because we haven't been humble enough to seek out advice and ask for help. Leave room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. And as you see your child get older, their need for autonomy is going to most likely increase, especially if they're a healthy young person. They're going to want to exert their independence more and more. And we want to give them room to do that in a healthy way, to show them that we know they are capable and competent and responsible. And we do that by providing opportunities for them to show that they can implement healthy habits, healthy positive habits, and that they don't have to do that on their own. I love you guys so much. I hope this video was a blessing to someone today. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye guys.